please welcome Lori, Christy, Jared, and Chris to the stage. Come on.
Thank you, everybody.
When we started really thinking about diversity and inclusion in tech and how we needed to improve that, Wayne and I spent some time really looking at where the issues were, and we realized that it's really an ecosystem level problem across the whole ecosystem of tech. And so we have designed all of our work really focused on across that whole ecosystem. We talked a little bit about that earlier today. And we've done some work with the Kauffman Foundation around their ESHIP Summit, really helping ecosystem builders to develop, with the tools to develop more inclusive startup ecosystems. And together, we invited these amazing people who are all working in very different ways to build startup ecosystems in an inclusive way. So I want to have each of you just introduce yourselves and say a little bit about what you do and the startups that you're working with. And if you wouldn't mind, I'll start with you, Lori.
Yes, Ampetu Washte, Mitaki Api Makasi Tomani Omaniwi. I'm Lori. I'm in Oglala, Lakota, and I was born and raised on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. And I'm a member of a larger group of tribes called the Ocheti Shakoe. And we kind of hit the map with what was happening at Standing Rock and you know, the disruption that happened there with a lot of things going on. But I'm born and raised there. I run a fund called First Peoples Fund. And we support individual artists, entrepreneurs, and culture bearers across the country. And we've been doing this for about 20 years, but we work in primarily communities that are really underbanked and underrepresented and lack broadband access, you know, a whole range of tech challenges we face in the community of which I come from. So it sets up a lot of other barriers around policy that impact our communities. So I'll stop there and thank you so much for inviting me here.
Yeah. Am I up next?
Yeah, sure. Let's go on the line.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Christy Pitts. I'm a partner at a venture firm called Backstage Capital. We just announced a new initiative, which is an accelerator program, and the accelerator will be running in 4 cities around the world starting in spring of next year: London, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and Detroit. Melinda and Wayne are part of the crew helping us with the accelerator. So at Backstage, we focus on supporting companies led by underestimated founders, and we define that as women, people of color, and LGBTQ plus founders. So really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jared Weiner. I work in Portland, Oregon for an organization called Prosper Portland. We're the economic development agency for the city, and we work with entrepreneurs in a handful of ways, but our latest endeavor is really around how we can make sure that entrepreneurship and small business development is as inclusive as possible in our community. So sort of the short and long of it is sort of historically we've had a program focus on micro enterprise and economic resiliency, which has been very much sort of an anti-poverty approach to entrepreneurship. That's sort of one hand, and then on the other, it's been sort of high growth business development pieces. And about a couple years ago, we worked to see what would happen if we brought those 2 ecosystems together and allowed folks to learn from one another. And so far, so good are sort of the early indicators of that work.
And hello, everyone. My name is Christopher McLemore. I am the program manager of the Oakland Startup Network at the Cape Horse Center. And what we do specifically is focus on helping idea to pre-seed entrepreneurs get access to capital, resources, and mentorship. This program came about through a partnership with Kauffman Foundation as well as the city of Oakland. And we decided to launch this program within Oakland because obviously the Cape Horse Center is located in Oakland, and we felt that these underserved communities needed access to different resources that we felt we can provide.
Awesome. So we have a lot of different, together we're all working on a lot of different communities, different types of communities, very geographically across the US and also London. What is unique about underrepresented or underestimated founders? What is unique? What are you finding that underrepresented, underestimated founders need to really thrive in the ecosystem?
Sure, I'll go first. One thing that I'm seeing is, for the most part, the tenacity and the resilience.
Yeah.
I think coming from a background where your introspective or your retrospective is quite different than kind of the community that you're serving for the most part, these entrepreneurs are able to, in my opinion, provide a sense of innovation that is very hard to come by. And innately, there's this sort of this hustle that is natural within entrepreneurs that are underserved. And I feel like this type of innovation is something that the community needs. It's something that the market and the industry needs as a whole. So that's kind of my perspective on it.
Yeah, I think to chime in, I think there's some unique systemic issues that underestimated founders face. You might be familiar with this phrase called pattern matching. So it has a bit of a negative connotation because in general, the pattern has been very homogenous. We say that we like to pattern match for grit. And I think that speaks to what you're saying about how underestimated founders really have this, don't give up, right? Despite what obstacles come their way.
Right.
And so the tenacity is there, the innovation, the entrepreneurship, the desire to learn, all of that is there. It's just making sure that we're providing a path that founders can build and be successful.
Yeah.
Well, I come from really rural communities, and I grew up in a community where the federal system is the primarily economic driver in our communities. And so we kind of often hover over like 70 to 80% unemployment. But I remember growing up and just how resourceful and scrappy my grandparents were, and just surviving and providing food sources, just living off of the land from what was available on the land. But also, my grandfather was he would use his little Volkswagen Bug and drive people outside of the communities, because we had, I think, one grocery store on the entire reservation, which is the size of Connecticut. And we started the first micro loan fund on Pine Ridge, very similar to the Grameen Bank. And it used a different model, of course, because there weren't a million of us in so many square miles. But so we really support artists, entrepreneurs, and culture bearers who are rebuilding and restoring traditional ecosystems in our community. Communities, and primarily rural. I just came from Alaska, and we work as far as Nome and Bethel, and as far as Maine and the Southwest. So we're working with systems that don't exist, or we're disrupting systems that don't work for us. So it's and then taking the skill sets and knowledge of the business world and applying that in indigenous communities, but also really doing it from a place of really heart and leading from the leaders of the culture bearers. And those are all of your grandmothers, your aunties, your uncles, those that taught you, right? And so for us, we really maintain this balance of making sure that we have a strong value core system that holds us all together. And if we're so focused on the business side, we have to back up and pause and say, okay, why are we here? And who really brought us here? How did we get here? And what did they go through? I have ancestors that were in Carlisle Indian boarding school. I don't know how many of you heard of that, but that was kill the Indian, save the man, right? So they tried to wipe us off this earth. And so there's 572 tribes across this country, and we support them one artist at a time, one individual culture bearer at a time. So thank you.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the things that we've discovered is, when you're intentional, you really see sides of your ecosystem and people that maybe aren't participating when you're not intentional. And that's been a really pleasant surprise. And I think, we've been able to see these businesses grow as a result. And I think, newsflash to everyone in the audience, I'm a white male. There's limits when we're talking to entrepreneurs that identify very differently than me, don't necessarily come from the dominant cultures, and have very different lived experiences. So one of the things we've really sort of learned from this work is that we have to be culturally specific with a lot of the services that we provide, and we have to have providers that can actually connect with people where they are and in those communities.
Awesome. Thank you all for the work you're doing. It's, excited to work with Christy and Backstage and Arlen and the whole crew. But you all are doing important work that's so needed. And with that, as we're talking about ecosystems, why is it not only important just to work with the founders, but also look at it from an ecosystem approach, and to help build or help rebuild or work with the local startup ecosystem? Why is it important to look at it from that level?
Yeah, so I'll jump in and just say that for us, what we've recognized through investing in 100 companies to date is that a startup isn't successful in a vacuum. And if we think about the companies that receive the most amount of press and news because they raised the most funding or they've had a big exit or whatever their measure of success is, they didn't get there by themselves. Behind the scenes, they had investors helping them. They often had local governments either helping them or perhaps turning a blind eye to what they were doing. They had employees that were there that were contributing their time. There's a lot of things that go into making a company successful, because a company is a group of humans working together towards something, right? So when we think about ecosystem for us, like for the accelerator, but also for any of the Backstage companies, or we call them headliners, so we're into music jargon. We think, how can the companies connect into the communities where they exist so that there can be a beneficial outcome for everyone and not just a few stakeholders that are involved in their glow up.
Awesome.
And if I can piggyback off of that, I also agree with Christy. One thing that we're doing to kind of move the needle a bit is leveraging partnerships in our community and beyond. And we're trying to find like-minded thought leaders and community activists that are trying to help entrepreneurs in these underserved communities and help them uplift different ecosystems. We're trying to find ways to bring in more mentors and advisors and convert these service providers into folks that can kind of provide access and help these entrepreneurs scale their businesses and in turn create jobs. Our goal is to help stimulate the economy. We don't want to kind of replicate what's going on in Silicon Valley. Our goal is to try to mitigate those issues that we're seeing and find new ways to provide access.
I can just use one example. We partner with Native Community Development Financial Institutions. And when I started this work many years back, there was a handful of them, and over today there's 72 in tribal communities across this country. So they're micro lenders. They're supporting entrepreneurs, and what we found is that they were missing the artists and culture bearers, from their own communities. So we one of the models that we have is on my reservation on Pine Ridge, and we purchased this shuttle bus, and we designed it into a mobile arts unit, and it's also a bank. So it goes into 9 districts on Pine Ridge, which I said earlier is like the landscape to Pine Ridge, and most of those districts are just housings in a federal office and maybe a convenience store if you're lucky. So the Rolling Res Arts drives all over that reservation, and we teach art classes, we teach business classes, we do banking on that thing, and we're building now the first ever Oglala Lakota art space on our reservation. And there's no investment in our communities. There's no investment in our communities whatsoever. We were able to launch this with the EDA award, and we've been hustling for a couple years to just raise $3 million to come up with the building, and then Art Place America and Bush Foundation out of Minneapolis and our town, the National Endowment for the Arts, has really allowed us to give us the opportunity to be creative and do what we want in a rural community where it looks much different than California, most communities in this area.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit there. Is, Lori, what was really impressive when you and I first talked, what was really impressive to me was basically you have that ecosystem on a bus, and from the education to the buyers, right, as well as the bank, and really all of that in a bus. And that's, I think, it's a practical and also a metaphor for what we all need to think about in terms of access, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a school on Standing Rock during the incident up there, and we brought the bus up there, and so all the kids were able to come on and do classes and make art with a lot of the artists that were camped out there, because the artists are the social justice, they're the activists, you know, and so it was really moving to see them be able to step up and just give the young ones, you know, whether it was carving or beadworking or quill working, you know, some of our more traditional forms of art, but teaching culture and the language also. And so I think, you know, really one of my advice is in terms of just really looking at the tech industry and you know, the work around ecosystems is just don't forget really who you are and you know, where you come from and who brought you there. And I think we all have those stories, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jared, did you? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of piggybacking off of a couple of the points is I think like on the ecosystem side, it's very sort of human-centered at the end of the day, whether it's a company which is a conglomeration of human beings or it's an ecosystem that is. But that's sort of why our focus is very much on the ecosystem, because you know we have limited resources. That's the impact that we can affect, and if we focus on just a group of companies there and that alone, then we're really limited because you know our interventions are pretty small as far as dollars come, and you know a lot of small businesses will fail. But if we're able to affect the humans that are within those businesses, not just the founders, they're going to have a longer life cycle as far as where their career takes them, the education, the training that they get, and sort of what goes beyond just that one company as well.
Jared, when did you become intentional about building a more inclusive startup ecosystem, and how did you start doing that? What is the story behind that?
Yeah, so I think like diversity and inclusion really sort of entered the lexicon of how our work started probably about 3 years ago or so. And what we did was we were taking an assessment of sort of how our economy was looking in Portland. We were one of the cities that was hardest hit by the recession. And at that point, we looked at the numbers and we'd more than fully recovered and we're doing better than most communities. But when you dug a little bit deeper, what you saw was there was a larger bifurcation from people that had wealth and good paying jobs and those that didn't. And when you looked at the data even more, you saw that that bifurcation was very much along racial and ethnic lines. When you look at the tech industry, women are also marginalized to a degree as well. And so whether it be our interventions directly on the inclusive entrepreneurship piece and the programs that we funded and the organizations that we supported, or just our general work as an agency and bringing sort of our larger sort of economic ecosystem together. Another good example of that would be with the tech industry, where we brought 25 companies together around increasing diversity and inclusion within their organizations. But it was really about 3 years ago when we took a hard look and assessed what success really meant as a community to us.
Yeah.
I would like to add that, you know, Google shows up in Native communities. So we have one of the largest national conferences called the National Congress of American Indians, and tribes come from all over there. And, you know, Google's been showing up there for, you know, at least the last 10 years. Wow. And we worked with folks from their, you know, their diversity group on organizing around some of the, getting resources to Standing Rock.
That's awesome.
That's great.
Awesome. Cool. On the ecosystem level, well, let me back up. On entrepreneurship level, we focus so much just on entrepreneurs and what they should do and how they should present and everything. I feel like we don't talk enough about the investors, especially when it comes to the ecosystem. They provide more than just money, right? And I feel like we have Arlen, we have Backstage, and Christy and the team, and there's a couple more great investors out there who, you know, the Kapors and what they've been doing. But what should, in terms of the role of investors and the investment community in terms of ecosystems, what are some of the ideas, what are some ways we can help get them to be, to do more or look at it more from an inclusive perspective? Do we need training just for investors? Like, so curious, what are y'all thought about it, or what have y'all done in terms of like helping the investors be more involved with create an inclusive ecosystem?
So it's a loaded topic, Wayne. How much time do we have? We don't have that much time. I guess what I'll say is there's two parts to your question, right? So like what responsibility do investors have for the companies they've invested in, the companies they're talking to, and then also like what do we do about all the investors that are not inclusive?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think now we're even out of time. No, I'm just kidding. I'll take the first part about like what responsibility do investors have, and this is something that we think about because we're investing in companies actively. So we have 100 companies in our portfolio. There will be 6 companies in each city in accelerators. So that's another 24. We're actively investing in other companies as well, and there really is a straightforward financial transaction that happens when we invest, right? The companies give us a percentage of their equity in exchange for money, capital. But there's a lot of other, outside of the legal and financial documents, there's a lot of influence that we can have on the founders. And for us, it's about ensuring that we're modeling the kind of companies that we would like to see our companies be, but also providing founders with autonomy so they can build the companies that they want to lead and grow. So for us, that means we don't put restrictions in term sheets necessarily. Some investors have done that. And they could have diversity and inclusion restrictions or other kinds of restrictions that they put in term sheets. We don't do that. We'd like to see our companies grow, but that's the CEO and the leading team. It's their responsibility to manage the company as they see fit. And then to the second half of your question about how do we help other investors understand, I think for me, what the biggest thing that, from my perspective about this, is that this is not a zero-sum game. Like the more inclusive the ecosystem is, the more everyone benefits in the ecosystem. And I think there's kind of a spectrum of whether you understand that or you don't. And for the people who don't understand that, I think the way that we get them on board is we show them what a winning ecosystem looks like. And if they can participate in it, if they're self-motivated, then hopefully that will lead to a chain reaction where we'll see better involvement.
And one thing that we're doing to try to kind of change that bias is we have a founder's commitment in place. So before we invest in a company, we make sure that the company itself buys into this founder's commitment to make sure that they're trying to make impact within our communities before they take the investment money. Aside from that, I think what helps is that if your investors look like the entrepreneurs they're trying to invest in, I think that can also help. I think there's a number of things that can be done to kind of change what we're currently seeing in this investment space.
Yeah.
I would just add that, native and rural communities are invisible in this country. So I think, look at not the ordinary places when you're thinking about places where entrepreneurship is happening. I know in our community, there's another organization called Thunder Valley CDC, and they've been doing some amazing work around housing and building construction company down there. And, so I think some of the social impact investment forums are important to identifying rural and tribal communities.
Awesome.
I want to ask we're close to out of time, and I want to ask a 2-part question. You can answer one or the other or both, okay? The first one is a really small question, which is, why does this matter? Why does this matter to our communities? And the second is, what are you excited about in terms of the future of innovation in your communities?
Okay, I'll tackle it first. So to me, there's the side that this is the right thing to do, but also coming from Portland, if you know anything about Portland, Oregon, it is not a very demographically diverse city by the numbers. In fact, our tech industry, just as an example, between 7 and 8 out of 10 people identify as white. But this trend is changing. So if you look at school-age population within our community, more than half of that community identifies as being from a community or being a person of color. And so our future workforce is going to look very different than our workforce of today. Mm-hmm. And if we don't change, we're going to leave so many people behind that I don't think our community will be successful in the long run.
And I'll try to sum it up quickly. I think short and sweet, it would just be providing opportunity, helping underserved communities as well as founders not only get access to different resources, but also trying to create more jobs and have impact in the community, stimulate the economy, and change what we're currently seeing right now in the ecosystem and industry in general. If there was something I was excited about in the future, I'd have to say maybe what's going on in the AR space. I'd be curious to see if there would be a company to kind of create experience to showcase what it's like to be a person of color or a woman, or some of the things that these people actually endure on a day-to-day basis.
I would say dream big. What the young woman said on the earlier panel is that, when someone asks you about, well, you don't have that money, you can't do that. I'm really excited about the next generation of young people in our communities who, really, they're more tech savvy than my generation for sure, and, aren't afraid to push back and aren't afraid to step forward. And they're also, where I come from, they're really restoring indigenous languages and culture. And I think, again, it's around identity and knowing, who you are. So I think as the changing demographics are quickly happening in this country, it's really important to we have a national program called the Intercultural Leadership Institute, and it's all diverse organizations that were never at the table, never included at the table in philanthropy, and then having things imposed upon us on how to do business. So we decided we were just going to form our own network, First Peoples Fund, National Association of Latino Arts Organizations, Alternate Roots, and PAI out of Hawaii. And we're learning to really work together and begin to understand our own shared histories and stories, because those are going to be the next generation leaders in this country, and you have to make room for them in the investment side as well. Plamaya.
So the question is, why does it matter and why are we excited?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
What are we excited about? Yeah.
it matters because I'm from California, I'm from the Bay Area, I grew up here, and I've always lived in a diverse community. And unfortunately, when I got into tech, I got into the most homogenous, worst environment ever. And it matters because I'm having the most fun of my life right now at Backstage, building with the diverse team that we've built. And I want everyone to have an environment like that. And what I'm excited for is I'm excited to see underestimated people succeed. Once the success happens, it creates this chain reaction. When founders win, their employees win, investors win. Those founders go on to invest in the next group of founders. Like you said, not everyone was at the table, but we can build a new table now. And that's our opportunity. And I'm excited to be a part of that change.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I think this is all exciting. If y'all haven't really processed or thought about inclusive ecosystem, you all are part of it. All are play a role in it. So please find your role and try to create change in terms of creating and building an inclusive ecosystem. So with that being said, let's give our panelists a round of applause, please. Thank you.
Thank you all for the work you do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.